My name is Jason, and this is Just Watches. All right, today we are going to compare the Squale and the Steinhart head-to-head. Now, I did a review of both of these watches. I'll pop the link up to those in the corner. So if you want the full details, you're going to want to watch one of those reviews. Right now, we're just going to be kind of comparing the differences that I've noticed. I've had the Squale for about 2 weeks now, so I've gotten pretty familiar with it, and I'm going to point out what I've noticed when it comes to Squale versus Steinhart. But before we begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. If you are enjoying the content, it would really help me out. And then if you like this individual video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much. So very similar cases here, although the Squale is a touch bigger at 40 millimeters in case diameter versus the 39 of the Steinhart. And then the Squale is going to wear a little bit longer on the lug to lug. They're both 47.5 millimeters lug to lug, but the end links do stick out proud here on the Squale. Similar finishing, you have brushing along the top and then high polish along the sides. Although I do notice that the brushing on the case and the bracelet of the Steinhart is a little bit closer in finish level than it is on the Squale. And then if I show you the two case profiles side to side, you can see the Steinhart is very straight across those lugs, and then the Squale does have a nice curve down at the end of both of those lugs, and that's greatly assisted by the curve in this end link, which does help it wear very comfortably on most wrists. The Steinhart is quite straight. On the 42 millimeter model, I think this can be an issue for some people, but on this 39 millimeter model and with the bracelet articulating straight down, it's not too big of an issue. And then they also do feature, they have crown guards, very similar crown guard styles, and then very similar crowns on both of these watches. As far as case backs, they both have designs on the case back. The Squale has that raised Squale shark. It's all high polish against a matte background. And then the Steinhart has this classic, I don't even know what this is. It's an individual wielding a trident riding a seahorse. Very cool. You can just see the level of detail on the Steinhart is a bit higher there. You can see the way it kind of reflects the light. Very cool case back feature. You know, it's not necessary, but I do like it when they design the case backs like this. And then these are both going to have great Swiss movements. The Squale is going to have the ETA 2824-2, and the Steinhart, because it's a GMT, is using the Sellita SW330-1. Now, the Steinhart is keeping better time, but that is just a sample of one. I think with any of these Swiss movements, you're getting a robust movement that's going to keep good time. It's going to be easy to service down the road. So it's kind of a tie there, except we are comparing a GMT to a simple three-hand movement. So the bracelets are very similar. They're both very robust. They both fully articulate against the back of the watch. The difference is primarily here on the clasp. You'll notice right away on the Steinhart on the right, there's a little bit more finishing and the metal is thicker. You have some high polish and then you have a chamfered edge. The Squale clasp is much more plain, and this piece, the keeper here, the safety catch, is much thinner. The Steinhart is just a little bit thicker. It has a more substantial feeling to it. And overall, the Squale clasp, it's totally functional, but it just feels a little bit cheap on the bracelet overall because the rest of the bracelet is very robust. So I'd have to say the bracelet overall on the Steinhart is just a touch nicer because of that much better clasp. But they both do use screw links and they both have 4 micro positions, so very similar in that regard. So both of these watches have 120 click unidirectional bezels, and I was actually wrong in my Squale video. I was corrected. This is a ceramic bezel on the Squale, and that's excellent because it's so warm and the color is so nice. I actually thought it was just aluminum, but it is a ceramic bezel. And actually the ceramic on both of these inserts is knockout. You know, sometimes the ceramic is not the best color tone, or sometimes it'll catch light and really drown out the numerals. And that's happening a little bit. You can see on the right with the studio lights, but in normal lighting conditions, both of these bezels play with the light really well. And they're both, I think the ceramic on both of them is excellent. Really good value for what you're getting at this price point. As far as the action, I actually prefer the Squale action. They're both very similar, highly tactile, really accurate, but the Squale one is just a little bit easier to turn. Steinhart has is a little bit infamous for having very tight bezels, although I will say it has slightly loosened up over time, although it is still quite hard to turn. Now, both of these watches feature sapphire crystal with anti-reflective coating and a Cyclops. And this is going to be a perfect example of the Cyclops difference. So you saw in the review last week, I really like it when a Cyclops actually magnifies. And look at the difference here. The Squale magnification is excellent. That 3 is gigantic. I can easily read it. What's going over here on the right with the Steinhart? That It's almost not magnifying the date at all. Like it is, it's maybe like a half of a power. But if you're gonna put a Cyclops on the dial, don't just do it for the aesthetic. I really want it to magnify the date. So the Squale Cyclops is so much better. The Steinhart one is there almost just for looks, and it kind of makes me hate it, especially when you have them side by side like this. Now these watches have the same handsets, but I think the Steinhart hands are a little bit better. You can see that minute hand is just a tad bit thicker, and it just seems to fit the watch a little bit better. The Squale hands almost look a touch small for the watch overall. And then the indices, now this is going to be mostly a difference in taste. The Steinhart has applied indices versus just the painted Squale printed ones basically on the dial there. I really like applied indices. I think they class up the watch a lot, but that's really going to come down to a matter of preference, what you prefer applied versus just painted indices. And then as far as the dial, again, that's going to be preference. Obviously the Steinhart is going with that matte black to kind of go with the overall theme of this watch. The Squale has this really great sunburst effect root beer. Both the dials are killer. They're both doing their jobs. I think it's just a matter of preference on that. Now, what about Lume? Well, as you can see, the Steinhart is going to hold on just a bit longer, and I will say, wearing these two watches, I find the Steinhart Lume more responsive. Squale's Lume on this watch in particular, this model, is definitely a weak point for it overall. So after spending a few weeks with both of these watches, which one do I prefer? Well, in this case, between these two specific watches, I do prefer the Steinhart. The bracelet, the clasp is just, it's nicer quality, and there's something about that. It really steps up the overall feel of the watch. And then minor things, I do prefer the applied indices, and I feel the Steinhart has better lume. So between the two, if I had to pick, I would take the Steinhart. Now, that's not to say the Squale isn't a great watch. I think there is value to be had in these Squales, especially if you like the aesthetic, you like the look. This root beer colorway is gorgeous, and I think they pulled it off really well. But let's not forget one other small detail. Both of these watches are available for around between $500 and $600, but we are comparing a GMT on the right to a three-hander on the left. If you want a Squale GMT, that's going to increase the price another $200 to $300. So we're not really comparing apples to apples here, and that just kind of demonstrates how much value there is in the Steinhart brand when I'm comparing a watch that's technically a higher end watch with that more complicated movement to a more just plain three-handed watch on the left, and they're both the same price, but I'm preferring the Steinhart overall. So keep that in mind. I do think Steinhart is the value king at this price point, especially if you want a GMT with a Swiss movement. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. If you could just have one or the other, which watch would you pick? And then, as always, if you're enjoying the content of this channel, I invite you to subscribe. If you like the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. That's it for this time. My name is Jason, and you have been watching Just Watches.